Welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday, a lectionary podcast from the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. I'm John Kennedy.
I'm Peter Walsh.
And we are rolling along through Luke here in ordinary time. This is a proper 14 for August 10th, 2025. And today we have Jesus giving a message that made me think of the Bobby McFerrin classic, Don't Worry, Be Happy. It seems that Jesus' message here is, don't worry, be ready. This is Luke chapter 12, verses 32 through 40. Jesus said, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down to eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." Okay, so we're in this section of Luke. It's very much in the thick of Jesus' journey to Jerusalem, and this is sort of a teaching-dense part of the narrative. Luke is pulling together teaching material from Mark, from Q, as scholars put it, and this is following a passage we actually omitted in the lectionary, a very important and classic bit of teaching on don't worry. So the don't worry section actually begins a bit before we begin here. We can talk more about that, and it also follows, of course, what you and Justin covered on the last pod, which was the man who stores up all his grain in his granary and is called out as a fool. So that's sort of where we are. Where would you like to?
Yeah, here we are on the travel log here, and it's a little bit, as you were pointing out, John. Some of the material that ends up in the Sermon on the Mount does not end up in the Sermon on the Plain and gets stretched out across this travel log. And then when Luke gathers the material together, we sometimes get these kind of stacked things right next to each other that can be a little jarring.
Yeah.
But Luke is a master writer. He is certainly of the Synoptic Gospels, the best writer in the Synoptic Gospels, I think is perhaps fair to say.
Yes.
And also, I just now we're still at 30,000 feet here. There are challenges in these teachings for us that really are real life challenges for us here and now. But there's other challenges in that Jesus is using biblical language that doesn't apply to us anymore. So there's a lot of metaphors tucked in all this stuff that might not be obvious. And so some of decoding the language is to figure out what the heck Jesus is talking about also.
Yeah. So maybe the best way to take it is just bit by bit.
Yeah.
And then we can see how there are resonances among bits of it that seem to sit awkwardly next to each other, that they all sort of have some, at least, a bit of relation to each other. So Jesus starts off by saying, this classic biblical phrase we find over and over again in the scriptures, do not be afraid.
Right.
It's a big deal. We can gloss over it because we see it so often.
Yeah.
It's a really big deal.
It's a big deal. And even to start that, as you pointed out, it's the lilies in the field before that.
Yes.
And it is such an incredible passage. Consider lilies in the field. We could do a whole podcast on that one sentence. But the lectionary flies over the top of it. But this do not be afraid. We are all afraid. It's impossible to go through life without some amount of fear. I think that's a fair statement. But we live in a time of incredible fear. I mean, I'd have heightened fear. And so Jesus is speaking to us. I mean, look at the world we live in. It's riddled with fear and anxiety. In the United States, 40% of young adults below a certain age have such fear and anxiety as to be, would be clinically depressed or clinically anxious. I mean, this is a big word to drop into our current world.
Yeah, it is. And without wanting to sound too judgmental of the fear that plagues people of our time, I think through this gospel lens, fear is connected to a lack of faith. Jesus has just exhorted his hearers, his disciples, not to worry because God cares for you, right? Consider the lilies of the field, consider the ravens.
Yeah,
and
even the ravens.
Right. And are you not much more than the lilies and the ravens? And do not worry about what you will eat, what you will drink. Life is more than food. The body is more than clothes. And this call, this command almost, to not be afraid, I think is very connected to that Jesus is inviting his disciples into a frame, into a view of reality and understanding of life that is rooted in profound trust.
Profound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I say that, the fear that plagues us today might have some connection to a lack of faith, I don't say that with any judgment or any sort of derogatory way, but simply that our society has wired us, programmed us, I think, so often to have nothing to really grab a hold of, nothing really solid that we can trust in, no real basis for faith. And so it's not to blame or put down anybody who, is plagued with fear because they're just not sure what their grounding is. It's just a fact that I think our society has been so decoupled from any sort of spiritual and solid existential grounding that so many of us inevitably, naturally find ourselves in that place.
It's interesting that you've discussed it with reference to faith. I think that has to do with not only with people who have no faith, but people who do have faith.
Yes.
So it's not slicing religion in half here.
No.
And I mean, we start here, do not be afraid. And he says, little flock. So this is a term of endearment. So the words that he's giving are loving. It's the Father's good pleasure.
Yes.
And it's the only place in the New Testament we hear that it's God's good pleasure to give the kingdom. And okay, so Jesus is saying that there is a spiritual world, not just a material world. And in the spiritual world, this is the nature of the spiritual world. And this is the nature of how you participate in the spiritual world. And the spiritual world is the ultimate world, the ultimate reality. And so he both has to open that up and describe that to us. And then he turns right around and he dismantles our occupations, preoccupations, and predispositions of this kingdom, this world. So he's doing a kind of controlled explosions, like you see when they take these buildings down and they all implode. He's kind of trying to break down things and also build up things. And the question of trusting, you're right on that. And I do think it's very easy to bring your faith up to a certain level and say, okay, Lord, but okay, what? But Jesus goes on to say, in particular, when he's trying to get us not only to have treasures of this world, but to have treasures of the other world, and he lays out, how to do this. Sell your possessions and give alms. Now, he's not saying, this is not like the rich young ruler. He's not saying sell all of your possessions. It sounds like he's saying, the way you build up treasure is to give alms. Almsgiving is a big deal in Lucan Acts, and it's a big deal in the Hebrew Scriptures too, which is almsgiving, over and above the tithe is what they're actually talking about. He's not saying give up to 10% of your income. They assume the 10%, I think, at some level. But he's saying give these alms, and those are the purses that don't wear out.
Yeah. It's all of a piece here. Jesus, again, is inviting his hearers into a way of being that's defined by being free from worry.
Being free.
Yeah, it's freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom from fear.
You're on.
Freedom
right
from
on.
attachment.
Right on.
Which just weighs us down.
Right on.
And plagues us with anxiety
Right
and
on.
tension.
Right on.
It just darkens our spirit.
Yeah.
Jesus, I think, calls us, as you mentioned, the whole Hebrew tradition calls its adherents to give. Certainly because it's just in accordance with justice that, human dignity is universal. The rich aren't any better than the poor. The poor deserve the same quality of life as anybody else, et cetera. You can frame that in any number of ways, but it's simply the right thing to do. But also, it's not a but, these things all go together, that we are free when we live in this open-handed, open-hearted way.
Yeah.
And we're not free when we don't.
Yeah, super well said. I love your open-handed, open-hearted way. So one of the things we talk about in the spiritual disciplines is, the way of detachment, and perhaps we don't talk enough about that. Jesus is trying to move us to detach from the things that actually don't be possessed by your possessions, sort of thing, right? He's detaching us from that which we attach to. And by doing that, he's freeing us. That's why I love your word freedom. He's freeing us through simplicity to attach and be attached to by the divine, so that when we attach to the divine, what we find is the divine is pouring gifts.
That's right.
And we are receiving, we are in the flow of a beatitude or benefits. We're going to get to some beatitudes in a little bit. And so that's what this is about. He's kind of clearing the decks. He's clearing the pathways. There's a form of spiritual asthma here, where we are unable to, be in the flow, to breathe in the fullness of the full divine. Yes. And so this is like an inhaler. By this, he's allowing us to breathe. But the more we detach, the more our lungs can breathe in the divine flow, flow. And so the more we breathe in the divine flow, the more we can be detached.
That's right.
But sometimes Jesus has to be harsh toward us to try to kind of try to break that.
Yes, and absolutely. And also being a part of the divine flow makes us like Jesus and in a way like God. Listening to you say all of that made me notice that he says, it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom.
Right.
And then he says, sell your possessions, detach, and give alms.
Right.
So as the Father gives to you, so you also are to give, not like just as this like injunction, you need to do this, but because this is the way.
Okay, we can end the podcast with that. Okay, that's the point. Right. That's the point. Right. That all the spiritual disciplines are to have us be like the divine being, and the self-giving divine being, which just pours out this love. That's what the spiritual life is. Yeah. Be like the divine being. Yeah. And when you're like the divine being flows through you. That's right. Exactly it. Your Father in heaven is generous. You be generous too, and you're going to be in the flow. You just said it. That's what this passage is about.
Yeah. One of Richard Rohr's, I don't know if it's one of his favorite things, but it's one of my favorite things that I've learned from him, is the scriptures, the message of the gospel, etc., is mystical before it is moral. And the morality is based on the mysticism. And I think we really see this here, that Jesus is giving what are essentially ethical and moral teachings, but they're grounded in this mysticism of being caught up in the divine flow, of imitating the divine.
Yeah. And that's where you get treasure in heaven, no thief, no moth. Okay, so just to give us a little kind of historical perspective here, right? So there's no bank. The richest people wore really expensive and beautiful garments, and guess what? Moths arrived. There's no ancient mothballs that I know of. Perhaps there are. And also thief. I mean, people, had their stuff stolen. We had somebody from our parish who just had an enormous theft in their house, and it happens with people who have, locked doors and security systems and things like this too. So, and then we go on to this great incredible truth. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Yeah. This is, I think, making it so clear what the cost is to being all wrapped up in possessions, in things that simply do not last, things that pass away. That our heart will constantly be troubled if our sense of being is rooted in stuff, in status, because all of those things are finite, impermanent, vulnerable to decay. And, if you're on top of the world one day, how many people want to claim your spot, right?
Oh yeah, it's so
and
temporary.
then
king of the hill.
Yeah, right. You become king of the hill when you're in your 40s or 50s or something. Let's say in a conventional sort of Western model of professional ascent, and then then comes the decline. And same thing goes for bodily health, right? I mean, people nowadays are often inclined to get all attached on their fitness and physique, which I think is great. I think it's great to be healthy and care for your temple in that way, but also you can get really unhealthily wrapped up in that sort of thing. All things in time, all things that are created, they come and go. It's their nature. It's the nature of created things. And I think Jesus is giving us a way to live in nature, in creation, as a part of it, joyfully participating in it, but rooted in what is unchanging, what is eternal, so our hearts can be steady and free. Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah.
So we find ourselves, we're rolling through this, and we're like, okay, man, we're with you, Jesus. Yeah, we're with you.
Yeah. Right. This is the easy part.
We're okay here, but we're challenged. Okay, no one can be totally comfortable with this guy.
Yeah.
Jesus is like this. He's the man to meet, right? But he's an uncomfortable guy.
Yes.
And if you're super comfortable with him all the time, you're probably not listening really deeply to what he has to say.
Right.
Okay. Then we get this be dressed for action. And then further down, we're going to get back into dressing, where he says he will fasten his belt. What does dress for action mean here? And so this is one of my favorite pieces and parts of you need to have this decoded. What does dress for action mean? And this dress for action is a phrase that goes back to the Passover, where at the Exodus, where you have to get dressed for action, and this whole idea of fastening his belt, that's cinching the rope around the men's long robe so that they can run. Right. That's the dress for action. Hike up your skirt kind of thing so you can run. Yeah. And so Jesus is suddenly, as you point out, he's putting us in the ready blocks here. Yeah. As we shift. Okay, so now we have now we're less attached to all this stuff, and now he's like, okay, now that you're less attached, let's get ready to roll.
That's right. Yeah, just as we're sort of finding our way into this spacious, don't worry, do not be afraid thing. Everything's all right. Like Three Little Birds, Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Which I think, I think is totally apropos here. I thought of Bob Marley a lot as I was preparing for this, precisely because of this juxtaposition. Yeah. Bob Marley's, for a lot of people, they imagine him as just this carefree, pot smoking dude on a beach. That was actually, the pot smoking, yes, but the on a beach part, that was not his life. His life was gritty. Because he came from, he was a city kid. He came from the bottom, right, of the social order. And even though he became, a global phenomenon, he was very loyal, and he stayed among the people his whole life. He was very much like Jesus in that way.
All right.
And so there's an incredible grittiness and an incredible prophetic fire to him as well. I would say at least half of his music is much more like an Old Testament prophet and like Jesus than, don't worry and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But both are true. Both are authentic expressions of his way of being, which was a way of being that was, about trusting God. That was his whole thing, give thanks and praise and so on. So we see this with Jesus too.
We do.
That it's not just take it easy. It's also be ready, and there's an urgency to heeding his message.
Yeah, thanks. And I just want to point out, folks in Podland, what other religious podcasts can you listen to and get a good review of Bob Marley's life? And it's paradigmatic life with the Hebrew prophets and with Jesus. Yeah, this is good. This is something you're uniquely bringing. I'll just say, Father Justin, who's been on the podcast, he can't do that. There's a lot of things. There's nothing that Justin doesn't know, but he doesn't know anything about But Marley. So I just joking here is each of us brings something different to this, which I think is super fun.
Yeah, I know nothing about Wagner, so there you go.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. That's the good call here.
Right,
that's what makes these podcasts fun for me, is the different nature of the conversation. So, I think that one of the things here, it is so easy to read through the passages for this Sunday and say, yeah, okay, I'm just going to keep moving to another passage that talks to me a little bit more. And the way we read through the scriptures, like you go, okay, this is good. Let's keep going until something really grabs me. And so if we were going to say, okay, no, try to take each of these passages and like mid-rash out something that cashes out in my life. So on this little area that we're talking about, this dress for action, keep your lamps lit, I think we're talking about, remember the story of the 5 bridesmaids?
Yes.
And whether or not they have oil in their lamps, and what's the oil? Well, the oil is, basically the spiritual disciplines might be the oil that allows your light to burn at night when it's dark. In other words, during the tough times, if you've done your spiritual homework, you have this. And I remember Ted Coolidge, blessed to each of us for his spiritual direction in our lives, saying to me something like, and Ted, the most humble man of all time, oh my God, the most humble servant there I can ever imagine, saying to me once very quietly, well, you can always tell which clergy pray and which clergy don't pray. And he just held that gently. It wasn't like it was laced with judgmentalism, but I think what he was saying was there is a light, an inner light that can burn with attentiveness to the divine, and that's not something you can get any other way besides setting the time and your disposition on the divine heart to be in reception mode.
That's right.
And so what he's saying here, dress for action, keep your lamps lit. There's a long wait here, folks, and it's almost like he's saying here, keep pursuing this path. Because we have a long wait, and you don't know. Let me just translate. We don't know when the Lord's going to come, or something like that. Unexpected hour. Yeah. Maybe we might not think about that as the second coming, which I wish Elizabeth was here to say, take that off the table. But we don't know when we're going to die, right? We've just done the parable of the rich fool, and so here this is these things of the life of the Spirit do keep you dressed in some sense for spiritual action. They do keep your lamp lit when it gets dark. They do keep you going. And I think that's how we might apply some of this paragraph.
I think that's exactly right. Luke, actually before we hit record, Jill Sekulis, our director of everything.
That's what I was going to say.
Was up here, and we were talking about Bible knowledge, and she was claiming she doesn't know the nuances of, what's a particularly, say, Markan or Matthean or Lucan sort of view. I'm sure she knows much more than she's giving herself credit for. But the point is, I think we see a bit of a Lucan flair here 100%. Because let's say with Mark, and certainly with Paul, not the Gospel of Paul, but the letters of Paul, this sense of Jesus is coming back, could be like today, could be tomorrow. We expect it to happen soon. Certainly you get that with the earlier Pauline letters, at least, and that trickles into the Gospels. And Luke seems to be grappling with this question of the delay in the expected timeline, that Jesus hasn't come back yet. The apostles are dying off. This is taking a bit. And because of that, I think this is precisely along the lines that you said, such a good message for us today.
Yeah.
That we're still in the in-between time.
Yeah.
Yeah, between the inauguration of Christ's being among us and everything that the Gospels tell us about, and the final consummation of all of God's purposes for us. Yes,
to what you're saying. But let me bring it one other step. This is for Jill. Okay, John, I think Jill's even watching this podcast here, but who knows?
Yeah.
But this one's for Jill. Okay, so there are differences in the Synoptic Gospels with reference to the waiting of the parousia, the second coming. And Luke is the least concerned of Matthew and Mark. And so we see that his least concerned because he takes this stuff that's in Mark. Mark is super concerned about it, but Luke deletes a bunch of Markan stuff and then changes the words on the Markan approach, softens it, and then writes the Acts of the Apostles, which is clearly about how the church is adapting to the life of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus didn't come back. And so now, so I would say if you're going to grade these as Mark, Matt, my cousins, my cousins are, I have cousins and I'm no joke. It's John, Luke, Mark, and Matt. No joke. That's their four names. And anyway, Matt, Mark, the most intense on that, then followed by Matthew, and then Luke is the least on that. But this paragraph, this is the most parousia oriented in the way you're describing it in Mark. But if you took the whole of the Mark and spread about am I waiting for this, Luke turns everything into every day. Take up your cross daily and follow me. Luke softens the whole thing, and he seeks to turn these disciplines that Paul in the letters of Paul was trying to say, this is coming, folks, the end is coming, get your act together. What Luke's response to that is, he is coming, folks. You got to get your act together, but you got to get your act together daily, because this is a much more elongated, stretched out thing here.
Yeah.
And so these radical apocalyptic spiritual disciplines, he's reforming these disciplines to be daily disciplines in our life. So this is super Lucan. That to come around the block and say, yes, this is super Lucan.
Yeah. I would say that Luke's attitude is like, we should be prepared for this to take a while, but not necessarily that it will.
Yeah.
A recognition that it's taken longer than a lot of people expected, because we're still here.
Yeah.
But I would say, it's at the end of this passage, the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour, that there is still very much this sense of a definite sort of discrete return, but we don't know when, and we shouldn't presume to think it's coming really soon or not at all. It's just be ready, because we don't know when.
Right, and I think that if you were gonna, I mean, different denominational approaches to this thing. I think the denomination that stands in the subway in New York and says the second coming's coming tonight. Yeah. I would say if Luke was getting on the subway, I think he'd walk by and say, I'd loosen that one.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't kind of go there with your poster.
Right. Right.
And so before we have to really wrap it up, I just want to touch another thing or two here, if that's okay for me to.
Same.
To shift here. And one of those I'd like to talk about here. And sorry, Rob. That's exactly. We're all responding to Rob. Rob is the one. That's not Jesus who we're afraid of. It's Rob. That this whole question here about the knock on the door, and that brings up in the book of Revelation. Behold, I'm standing at the door knocking.
It's almost the same image.
Yeah. If you hear my voice and open the door, this whole thing, which was a prominent image in Christian art in the early 50s. You might see the tree with Jesus knocking at the tree, the door in the tree. It was in many households and churches. And so you get this knocking. And I do think that knocking is a very interesting, spiritual way to understand that the divine isn't just a static and neutral thing. The divine is coming to you, and this knocking. So I kind of think there's a way to program that a little bit, which is kind of cool, and that echo there. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I love this knocking image, because it comes not so long after Jesus' teaching on prayer, which is actually the last podcast that I recorded. Jesus there is teaching his disciples to ask, seek, and knock. So there's this element of our spiritual life, of our lives in Christ, where we are to take initiative and seek God, but more so, God seeks us. Yeah. God comes to us. And I see, with the end of the podcast in mind, just to sort of say a word that, to me anyway, helps bring these two different themes, don't worry and be ready together, is that Jesus in the second passage is making it quite clear, as the Hebrew scriptures say, the world is the Lord's and everything in it, right? And so this is God's world, and God, principally through the ministry of Jesus, is bringing the world into accord with God's will and God's purposes, which is, justice and peace, shalom, etc., the restoration of everything that has sort of gone off the rails. And therefore, there is a certain urgency to live in accordance with all of that. Because, if the world is going to be restored into let's say the image we get at the end of the book of Revelation, at the very end of the Bible, God's dwelling place being among mortals, the healing of all pain, of all hurt, no more tears, etc. Then our task is to be the sorts of beings that can inhabit that kind of world.
Oh, yeah.
The direct, unmediated presence of God, essentially, the beatific vision. And that requires some real work. And so it connects, I think, to this earlier bit about, sell your possessions and give, let the divine life flow through you, because that is exactly the sort of being, quality of being that I might go as far as to say is required in order to be in the direct, unmediated presence of God and to live in sort of the new heavens and the new earth, whatever exactly that means, some sort of restored, created order. And so it can seem sort of paradoxical, but I think the more time you sit with it, the more they sort of naturally come together and congeal, that we can both be profoundly relaxed, but also very disciplined in our spiritual lives. That living in communion with God is a very particular way of life. It can look like a lot of things, but it can't look like anything.
Yeah, interesting.
And yet it is a way of profound relaxation and freedom. We're sort of in that stream. I think of it as sort of like a jet stream or something. Like once you find your way into it, it's just natural. It just flows. But you got to stay in there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I like that. You're talking about references to the last two chapters of the book of Revelation and how important they are and what it means to live in that. To live in that flow that you're describing. We talk about the Beatitudes, and they usually think of the Sermon on the Mount, and then we have the Beatitudes in Luke's Gospel, in the Sermon on the Plain, where there's 4 Beatitudes. But there's something like 14 Beatitudes in Luke's Gospel, and we get 2 of them here.
Sure.
And one of the Beatitudes, I think the way to understand that, because I think it's really important that we understand that the question of the Beatitude in this case is tied in a little bit like that weird, it's a weird story that you open the door, the guy who's been at the wedding comes in, he hikes up his skirt, he puts his belt on, and then suddenly he's serving you dinner in the middle of the night. I mean, what does this mean?
Right.
And I think what it really means is the God of reversal that runs through Luke's gospel, and that what you find, the closer one comes into the divine, that one feels served by the divine. That's the ironic,
yes.
That's the reversal. And so the beatitude is the giftedness of receiving that which divinity with a capital D desires to give you. And if you can get yourself in that flow, this is what you receive.
Yeah.
You receive these beatitudes, and the beatitudes aren't just a future thing. They're downloaded into the deepest life of your soul. And that's the transformative element in the spiritual life. Yeah. Not that we did all this spiritual disciplines. It's the transformative element is they set us up to receive this beatitude, because we can't transform ourselves. That's what the Pelagian controversy is about at some level. But right. The divine being is the transformative element in us. Yes. And that's what these beatitudes are about.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to receive.
Yeah. Well, so much more we could say, but I was trying to work out some pun about the pod ending at an unexpected hour, but that's the best I can do. So thanks.
Okay, you already brought us Bob Marley. Who cares if you got a great line at the end?
Yeah, good enough. Thanks for sticking with us and all the way to the end. I mean, I was going to say you didn't know when it would end, but there is, of course, a timestamp. So you knew exactly when it would end, but we didn't know. But expected or unexpected, we'll dock the boat here. And as always, are so grateful and energized by your attention and your listening and your watching and your commenting and all that really good stuff. It really feeds us and therefore feeds the pod. So keep it up, and we look forward to being with you next time.